and welcome to That's Just Human, a podcast that explores all aspects of being human, living in a human body, and dealing with life's obstacles. I am Elisha Light Angel. I'm a licensed massage therapist, and I've lived a lot of life in my own body, and I'm here to help share other people's amazing experiences and some of mine along the road. So today we're delving into a really cool topic, one that I've of probably way younger than I need to, and it's about aging with grace. So we're talking to somebody that I think is super cool. I started doing yoga a year ago, and this is one of my yoga instructors, and her name is Gail Holland, and we're going to be discussing how to age with grace. So, welcome on, Gail.
Hi, nice to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited. This is such a great, juicy topic to delve into. Um, I probably got worried about aging in my 20s, which I feel like maybe the 20 sums are doing today now that there's things such as Botox and all sorts of different stuff you can get done. And,
Absolutely.
and it's expensive and it's only temporary and you have to keep going back for more. And so I think there's a lot of other ways, especially since in our childhood there was no such thing as going to get Botox. It's a relatively new medical innovation that allows people to keep wrinkles down. But there's so much more than the way that we look. It's the way that our bodies are.
All that is so superficial. I remember thinking when I turned 30, I was so old. And then I hit my 40s and I thought, the 40s are kind of cool. And then I hit the 50s and I thought these are even better. And now that I'm in my 60s, I think as long as your health holds out, the 60s have been amazing so far.
Well, I look forward to getting there. Just for the audience, I'm currently 44, and you don't have to say your exact age, but we know you're in your 60s.
I'll be 67 in September.
That is so amazing. One of the things that I really admire about you is not only are you doing yoga on, I don't know if you do it daily, but mostly daily basis and teaching, and then you go on uh, very long hikes. They,
Yes, we do. I think we hiked in 9 states last year, and we just got done with a 2-day, 16-mile hike, one night camping in 32-degree weathers. But I have these friends that just they keep pushing me, and I think as we age, that's important to have people that bring out the best in you and maybe push your limits. I was definitely at my limits. Would have never done that by myself.
I believe that friends and mentors and other people can help give us that push when we're on the edge of, or teetering on the edge of doing something that
It's
feels a
good
little insane at the moment.
It's good to have an accountability buddy, and I have several of those. We go to the gym, and if I don't want to go, one of my buddies will call and say, "We going to the gym today?" And you're going, "Yeah, I guess so." So off we go. So an accountability buddy is a great thing to have as we get older.
That's, I think there's a good amount of truth to that. Um, so a lot of people are not doing this in their 60s. They're just kind of relenting to, oh, my body's getting old, I have aches and pains. What
Absolutely.
what has been your motivation in keeping up your physical health and now living the lifestyle that you are?
I've always been active through my entire life. Um, Maybe I wasn't as active when I was working, but I'm retired now. And I just see the results of older people not being active. They start shuffling. Your body's a finely tuned machine. It may not be as fine when you're older as it was when you were younger, but it is. We have to watch what we put in it, but moving is super important.
And have you been moving your whole life? Is it something that you picked up somewhere along the way? And how has that changed for you over the years?
I've always been pretty active. When we were kids, we'd get on our bikes and ride everywhere. That was in the days when you could still do that, 100 years ago. And in high school, I played tennis a lot. Uh, I was a lifeguard. Then in college, I did intramurals, and I've just maintained that lifestyle. But now that I'm retired, like you take my yoga, I started doing yoga when I was 40, but it was kind of off and on, and it wasn't really until my family responsibility, life happens. And so we can't be maybe as active as we'd like to, you know, with jobs and all that. But when things slow down, that's why retirement's a great time to get active and do the things that we've been meaning to do and maybe didn't have time.
That makes a lot of sense. So when you say you were intermittent, what did that look like as far as, I mean, juggling a job, juggling a family, and then putting workouts in? Was it just a couple days a week? Were you doing short bursts of workouts or lengthier ones when you could do it?
There may be 2 months where I did nothing. I mean, when you're running children around everywhere and you're working, so your physical health and your time a lot of times will determine what you can do, but you have to make it a priority.
And what about the hiking? How long have you been hiking?
Well, a lot of that started during COVID. I've always been interested, but during COVID, I was looking after my elderly mother, and I really cut my contacts, going out. So I thought, what can I do that I would still be around people that I feel is safe? And I joined what's called the Women's Hiking Crew. And I've met so many amazing ladies. There's a group of about, oh, it's real fluid, but the Women's Hiking Crew has over 1,000 members, and they sponsor hikes, but we go on our own hikes. My friends hike, and it just started with little local hikes, and it's ended up. We go to South Dakota, we go to Wyoming. It's really grown from there, mainly due to COVID. So COVID, as bad as it was kind of had a silver lining for me anyway.
Wow, that's really fascinating. So, was your first hike a lot of miles, or did you start out with a little bit of miles and work your way up?
I remember I hiked a little bit when I was in my 50s, and 3 miles was about it. 3 miles was a lot. So now with a backpack, 10, 11 miles is about as far as I like to go with a heavy backpack.
That sounds a little bit grueling to me. I'm not,
It is grueling. Like this weekend, it took me right up to my physical edge. And you may not be enjoying it the whole time, but when you're done, you think, man, that was tough, but what an accomplishment. Well, you're working with your yoga. I'm sure you've
yeah,
been I, I'm sure you've been in yoga classes that are maybe a little difficult. And in the middle of it, you go, why am I doing this to myself? And when you're done, you think, that was awesome. I did it. That was an accomplishment. I'm going to do it again. I think we have to push ourselves no matter how old we are. We have to get out of that physical and mental comfort zone.
I would definitely agree with that part of the yoga journey and getting in touch with my body. You know, they say just show up to the mat, and then once you're there, you start doing things. But there's been days where I had to really make myself show up to the mat. And the whole time I was in my head, being like, I don't feel like being here today. But then you go through it, and after you're done, you feel a lot better. And then there's a lot of what I call micro now what's the word I'm looking for? Micro wins. And, uh,
Exactly.
and
Micro
so,
victories. Yes.
oh, I like that, micro victories.
Yes.
So it helps keep me motivated to have those little micro victories because then I wonder, oh, if I keep doing this, what else can my body do eventually that I think that it currently cannot do?
Absolutely. We go to the gym and we do this stair climber thing. And the first time I did it, I couldn't do it for 3 minutes. I thought I was going to die. And then I was working for climbing a mountain in New Mexico, and you work up to it, and the next thing you're doing it for half an hour.
Wow.
So as we get older, that movement is important, and it looks different from everybody. Mine may look different than my neighbors. They may have hip problems, they may have joint problems, they may have any kind, injuries or whatever. So you can't compare yourself to other people either, whether it's yoga or at the gym or hiking and as we get older, we need to learn to accept our limitations and recognize them, but still push beyond them. There's a happy medium right there in the middle.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Physical activity, I guess, would be one of your secrets to aging with grace. Um,
absolutely.
what are
I think
other
it's the
things?
most important one, but there's a lot of other things that we can do as we age to age gracefully.
So, what are some other things that you've done? And I guess you said you kind of started thinking about it around your 40s. So, I don't know if you've implemented all these around then, or when did it come into your life with some of the other things you're going to share with us?
I think a lot of things, they're lifelong practices, but it's just when you're older, maybe, and your responsibilities are a little less than that you can really jump in with both feet. Um, we have to be lifelong learners. I think that's a secret to aging. You can't just say, I'm done reading books, I'm done learning about history, I'm done with all of that. I'm out of college, I'm done with school. The world is an amazing place, and we have to and it includes keeping current by maybe having younger friends. I have younger friends that are just, they're wonderful. They keep me current as well as my older friends. I have friends of all ages. So learn from people, learn from books. We have to keep learning new skills. I've always been kind of artistic. I've always wanted to paint. So I've been taking painting lessons now. So learning new skills, it doesn't matter whether it's painting or pickleball or hiking I mean, the world is full of things that you can do. Um, in retirement and as we get older, we have the time and the ability to do it. I took the Master Gardener program after I retired.
And are you doing gardening now?
Yes, well, my degree's in agronomy. I retired with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, so I've always been interested in that, but uh, I have the biggest home garden that I've had myself, and I started it last year.
That's so cool.
It's not very big. It's still a micro garden because it's like, oh, 10 by 12. It's not very big, but that's all I can handle with everything else that I'm doing.
Neat. So, are there any other skills that you picked up later in life? Because I think we often think you have this trajectory route of going to school, go to college, do certain things, and then we forget that we can acquire other skills along the way. So, aside from painting, what you've done in retirement, when you were a little bit younger, did you pick up any other skills that have stuck with you or gotten lost?
I've done calligraphy.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes, I used to teach calligraphy classes. What else? I quilt. I
Okay.
paint. I love to cook. Uh, hiking. What else have I done? I'm sure there's something else in there. I'm just
That's really
game for
cool.
anything.
I love that. So, what are some other secrets of aging with grace?
You have to surround yourself with the right people.
Mm,
They don't have to be the prettiest or the smartest or the funniest or anything, but they have to, like I've mentioned already, they have to challenge you, but they also have to be on your team and you have to be on their team. I've had friends in the past that you felt like it was slightly a competition. You want to be around people that are happy for your successes and you're happy for their successes. You want positive friends that push you to be your best.
I love that. I also feel the older I get, the more important I find to create a support network of
Absolutely.
friends because
Absolutely.
we never know what's going to happen in life or even the people that we've chosen to couple with if they'll still be there. So by having multiple people that you can love and rely on, then if something happens and you need someone to lean on. There will be a person out of the multitude that you have created a network for.
Right. And there may be certain people in your life that fill one need and another person that fills another need or interest. So these people can meet all of the things that you want to do and that you're interested in. For
That,
example, I have my yoga community. I love my yoga community. I have my hiking community. They don't necessarily overlap, but they're both important in life. You can have your church community. You can have your volunteering community. They don't have to, it's great if they overlap, but that's part of continuing to learn is that association with people. I remember I read something during COVID that when people did cut back on going out, that they realized that they missed maybe not the main players in their life, but other people that you're affiliated with that you don't interact with as much, that people realize that that was a big loss. Maybe that person you don't see all the time, but when they're not there, it's a huge gaping hole that you would have never thought was there.
mm, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't heard that before, but I can see that, especially for people that do involve themselves in several different communities. It's
Right.
not that usually you might hang out with somebody, say in a yoga class, and that's where you see them regularly, and then all of a sudden they're not there, and you're like, well, it's kind of not as cool without them here, but maybe they'll come
Absolutely. Yeah.
back.
And you may not hang out with these people on a regular basis, but when they're suddenly not in your life anymore, it's a big loss that you wouldn't have thought was there.
Mm, indeed.
Another thing about aging that has really, I've talked to you about my yearly plan. I have a yearly theme.
Well, tell
One
the
year,
audience. You've told me. Tell them, and I'll even learn more with you.
I don't do New Year's resolutions. I do New Year's plans. And I have an overarching theme for the year, something I really, really want to. You know what? I'm at my desk. Here, I'll show you. This is this year's plan right here.
Okay.
And you'll notice it's not all I got to lose weight. I got to do this. I have to do this. I have to, all these things. I have a whole column for fun. These are fun things that I have to do this year.
I love that. Um,
So one year the theme, and it literally changed my life, and I think it's one of the keys to aging gracefully, is to identify the people, places, and things that matter
mm,
and spend your time there. I've been to more than one funeral where people are crying and they're saying, I wish I would have spent more time with mom or dad or grandma. Well, you failed to identify them as one of the people, places, and things that were important, and you didn't spend your time there. So now that they're not there anymore, you regret it.
oh, I'm getting goosebumps on that one.
It really is important. I mean, we might prioritize friends or workmates or people that maybe don't prioritize you. I mean, we've all done it. We've all spent a lot of energy, places. Oh, I want to go, maybe a young kid. I'm going to go to the bar all the time, and they put their priority there. Well, maybe their priority needs to be studying in college. So th when you identify the things that really matter and spend your time there, you're just so much more productive. And
Mm,
sometimes it may be having fun. Sometimes it may be doing what you need to be doing. Right after I did that, I'd always go see my mother and stay, 2 or 3 days and say, I got to get back to work. I got to get back to work. So I went to visit her right after I made that my New Year plan. And she said, how long are you going to be here? And I said, I'm staying for 5 days, Mom. I'd never done that because she lived in New Mexico. I'm from New Mexico. She's in New Mexico, I'm in Oklahoma. And she goes, well, you can't do that. You need to get back to work. And I said, well, Mom, do you remember what my plan for the year is? It's to identify the people, places, and things that matter and spend my time there. And she said, well, yeah. And I said, well, you've been identified as one of the people that matter. I thought she was going to cry.
aw, that is like. That is very touching,
Yeah.
especially if the relationship before had been putting your work above, seeing her, and I can that it just sounds a lot.
And how
Like,
many people do that? They say, I can't go see my parent or my grandparent because of my job.
mm,
10 years from now, that job, they would have been just fine without you there, but your parent or your loved one will know that you took time out to go see them.
yes.
And the
And do you
things,
reevaluate this question frequently, or was it that 1 year and it's stayed the same for you?
well, what happens is when you make a theme for a year and you make it a habit to do it every day, every month, it becomes a habit and it becomes part of who you are.
That makes sense.
Yeah, another year, my overall theme was uh, there's no excuses. You can't say, I don't have time, I don't have money, all the excuses we come up for not doing things. And after a year of not making excuses, you get to the point where you say, I need to quit making those excuses and just do it.
How do you determine if something is, I guess, valuable enough not to make an excuse for? Because I find myself as the type of personality that I want to do everything. I mean, it's not possible to do everything that I want to do. There's not enough of me to go around. There's not enough time. There's not enough energy. And I find that I have to be more choosy on where I am putting my time and energy. And
So
I
that
don't,
would be a great thing for you so you need to rein yourself in and say, what's the best expenditure of my time?
mm, yes,
And when you say people, you can also say places. Okay, is it more important to, let's say you're a person that is a spiritual person and it's Sunday morning. And it's like, do I get up and go to church or do I sit here and drink my coffee? And you have to balance. I've identified church, for example, as a priority, so I need to do that.
right. Well, you could still have coffee in church. You
Right.
can,
But I just use that as an example. Or my big problem is I'll be working on a project that needs to be done and somebody calls me and says, "Let's go do this." Well, I really need to be working on my project. I'm the one that says, "Okay, I'm out of here." So I've had to work on staying put and working on my projects.
okay. So
And
yeah,
things. You need to identify the things that matter. I've been clearing so much stuff out of my house. I thought I've had this for 20 years. This thing is not a priority. I need to get rid of it. So
yeah,
part of that is cleaning things out that serve no purpose anymore.
that makes a lot of sense. I know I've done your plan looks extravagant because it's a whole page written with a lot of stuff on it.
Uh-huh.
But what I've been doing the past, I don't know, 6, 7, maybe 8 years, I can't remember. I
Uh-huh.
pick a theme for the year. So it's usually a one-word theme. I have 2 words this year. But for instance, I did 2 years in a row with consistency as my theme. It did not
Uh-huh.
stick after 1 year. It was
Yeah.
a very hard thing as being a very impulsive person
Yeah.
to be consistent with something and not just go on to something else and be like, oh, I don't care about this. So it feels very adulty to me to be consistent, and that's like just being consistent on showing up to work and not quitting. And uh,
Absolutely. Well, and
and
when you get older and you start these new endeavors, say like with me, my painting, you have to consistently work at it or you're not going to get any better. You consistently have to work at staying active and in shape, or you're not going to do it. So, consistency is a big part of aging gracefully as well. You have to be
yeah,
consistent. You can't go in spurts and say, I'm going to go to the gym 20 times in January, and then in February and March, I'm not going to go at all. It's kind of routines a little bit.
that makes sense. Even with my yoga journey, I'm not going as hard and heavy as when I started, but I
Right.
am still consistently making time every week to do it a minimum of once a week and not drop the ball. And that if my energy's put somewhere else, to allow myself the compassion and grace, um, that I'm not being as gun ho about it. Because when you, I don't know about everybody else, but when I start going a certain way, I think I have to be doing this workout this many times or I failed. And getting out of that mentality and being, you know what? I'm actually doing it. I'm not a failure. And it's okay if right now this is where I'm at. And as long as I just keep it up, and then I can go more when that fits into my life and less if it doesn't.
Well, my theme for this year is the first day of every month is the first day of a new year.
Mm,
So we have all these good intentions in January, and maybe at the beginning of February we haven't done it. Well, we can rededicate ourselves to consistency and learning in February. And if we don't do well in February, we can do it in March. We can work on that consistency and work on all those things that help us get older with grace.
I like that. Now, how do you remember that? Is it because you wrote it down and you look at that often? Do you have a recording or something that pops up on your phone on the first of every month and says, as a reminder, this is what you're doing?
No, I tape it to my bulletin board or on the inside of my closet
Okay.
so that every morning when I open my closet, it's there. And some years I'm better than others.
I
But
mean, that's how we are as humans.
and it
Sometimes,
just I find that it just helps to write it down. One thing I'm going to do this year, staying engaged and staying active, is I don't go to the movie theater very often. So I think part of getting older is keeping a toe dipped in modern culture,
mm,
knowing what's going on. So I have to go to 4 movies this year. I have a tendency
okay.
to wait until they come out on Netflix. So that's part of staying engaged and active and continuing to learn.
I like that. See, that goes along with these are fun things to do and not necessarily something that you don't want to do. Tell the audience about what you're doing this year with your bingo card.
Oh, well, I have a bingo card, and there's a little square. One of them was to get a bunch of paperwork filed. One of them is to clean my pantry. Some of them are on my New Year's plan, and every time I score a bingo, um, I have to celebrate. So go out and have a meal, get a new pair of socks, a new purse, have a trip. I don't think we celebrate enough. And I think as we get older, we have a tendency to be like, well, I'm old. I just turned 60. I'm so depressed. Well, why not celebrate those, like you say, those micro victories?
I love that. I think more celebration should be in all of our lives, and it helps break up the monotony of some of the day-to-day stuff that we do and gives us a reason to do something different and something to look forward to.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we need to celebrate those victories because we might have a lot of failures. We don't need to be depressed. We just need to work for that little victory. Like
I love that.
the day I got all my paperwork filed, I went and bought myself, I try not to keep cake and stuff at the house. So I went and bought myself a piece of chocolate cake and a purse. And that was my reward for that one bingo square. I mean, that was a big one. So from now on, I only get to do that if I get a whole bingo. And then
Okay.
I think the bingo card is kind of fun, and it's things you're probably going to do 80%. There's an 80% chance you're going to do them, but if it can help you get a bingo, then it's gonna push you over the line because you want to celebrate yourself.
Now, I really love that because one of the things that has helped me in life in general is to gamify it. And
Mhm.
even with having this podcast, I opened my first episode kind of talking about, I went through the rules of being human. I didn't write them, it was written by somebody else, but I
Mhm.
put my little take on each one. And I've always made a game out of things, especially if there is something that's really difficult or challenging, or life's given you 500 lemons and you've got to figure out what to do with them. make a game out of it. I can get through this, and then you have little reward points for yourself. So that also gives us the actual dopamine hit that we need to feel the little happy chemicals surging through us. And if you gamify something, I think it can help make things feel easier, and um, hopefully it can help with things that are addictive for some. Since I don't have an addictive personality, I can't speak
Hmm.
to what that is like to try and overcome, or what works for somebody that is more prone to that. Um, but gamifying life just makes it more fun and easier to get through the hard times.
And celebrate with your friends. Celebrate your friends,
Mm.
when they accomplish things. And as we get older, I think that's more and more important because we have a tendency. I've noticed now that I've gotten a little older, I'm a little more content to stay home than I used to be. So sometimes I need something to get me out of the house. So my little thing about going to the movie, that's going to get me to the movie theater. Just encourage us to be more active.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, So I'm quite curious, because if I think of my life, for instance, in decades, 20s was still really exploring, 20s and 30s really, I was exploring on who I am. 40s for me currently is really tapping in to who I have discovered that I am,
Mhm.
and becoming more solid with that. But I
Yeah.
would say within each decade, the amount of growth that has happened on a personal level is different and varies. So I'm kind of curious how you view your life in some of those decades, and why you say now in the 60s that it's even more glorious. Because I am feeling that in my 40s. I'm like, oh, my 30s were great, and I think my 40s are like getting even better.
Oh, I remember thinking that the 40s were wonderful. And then, and I tell everybody that's about to turn 50, I say, you just wait until you turn 50 because the switch is going to flip, and it does. You talk to women that are over 50, there's a switch that flips when you're 50. And it's not that you don't care about things like you used to. Y- You just, things, you don't worry about things that you used to. Things that you used to put a priority on aren't that important anymore. You speak your mind more freely. You're maybe not as I'm not going to say a pushover, but you're a little more brave to say, I worked for USDA, and I had a farmer, and we were talking about livestock, and he was a good friend, good producer, and he was talking about all these animals, and I said, and I knew he did. I said, do you have a woman that is over 50 years old in your household? And he goes, I sure do, my wife. And I said, that's the most dangerous person on your farm right there. Did you know that? And he said, what do you mean? I said, when women turn 50, the switch flips, and they want, you don't put up with as much. You speak your mind more freely. You know what you want. You don't care about what people think as much. I mean, you still do, but you've kind of identified the people, places, and things that matter. And all that other stuff is just noise. And you're
Mm,
able to put the noise behind you. And then I think it even gets more when you hit 60.
I
I
could
mean,
see that. I mean, I already feel in my life that each year I live, that those things kind of drop off. Eventually you get to a point, and I would say in the 20s and maybe early 30s, I was still carrying a lot how other people thought of me. How do I look? How do I present myself? What do they think if I do this thing or that thing? And then that started to fade away. And now,
absolutely.
um, and so I feel like every year of my life, I just start losing more and more fucks. And I feel, yeah, and I feel that um, in my 40s, even, I would say maybe 41 or so, it's almost like I feel there was my own switch of just losing, like, I don't care about this or that. I'm just gonna say it like more like what it is. And it just gets more. So I can only imagine what that turns out to be. In
I think the most noticeable one for me was I used to color my hair. And I would tell everybody my strategy for aging is yoga and hair color. And for years, I don't think you didn't know me when I turned 60, but I hit 60 and I thought, you know what? I'm 60 years old. I've earned every one of these gray hairs. I'm going to let my hair go gray now that I'm 60. And I had a friend say, "Oh, you're going to start looking old." And I thought, I am old. I'm 60 years old. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with it. And I love my gray hair. I love that I'm not paying 100 and something dollars every 6 weeks and sitting in that beauty chair. And gray is beautiful.
hmm
You look older, but it really doesn't matter. My grandma name, I have a lot of friends that have different grandma names, and I'm Granny. And somebody told me, they said, "Well, that kind of sounds old, like you're an old woman." I said, "I am old. I'm in my 60s." And I embrace it. I embrace being older. I love being older. I love being in my 60s.
Self-acceptance.
It,
That's
it,
a good
yeah.
secret to aging with grace. I think our society builds us up to not accept ourselves, to try and fit certain images, and that can be very depreciating to our own minds, to our bodies, the things that we do to try and fit into those molds, and releasing that and just being like, this is me, this is how old I am, this is how I present, and I'm fine with it.
But I do have to qualify that. I've been extremely lucky. Not everybody is as lucky as I've been. My body is holding up. I know people my age that have had knee replacements and have bad hips and have, so I can't sit here in good health and say, "Oh, you need to do this, this, and this," because there's people my age that are dead. I mean, they've had cancer, they've had so when I say we need to be active, there can be a lot of limitations to that. And I'm one of the lucky ones. I have a friend that tells me she's in her 70s and the woman is amazing. She does a minimum of 10,000 steps a day. She's walking around the neighborhood all the time, all the
Wow.
time. If you met her, people would have a hard time keeping up with her. And we were sitting on the patio one night and she goes, "You know what? We're one of the lucky ones. We're too old to die young."
Mm.
And I was like, whoa, you're right. So, our bodies can be our limiting factor. That's why it's so important when we're your age to start taking care of them. Eating well, hydrating, taking care of yourself, being active, because, back to what I said earlier, the body is uh, it's an amazing machine, but if you don't change the oil and rotate the tires, the the life expectancy isn't going to be as long as if you take care of yourself.
Uh-huh. I agree. Did you have any other secrets that you haven't thought of yet?
Oh, I think just embrace age, be positive, stay current, learn, be interested in the world around you. All the things that we should have been earlier in the life that maybe we didn't have time for, and now that we have time, just do it on steroids.
I
And
like,
and meet wonderful people like you every time you come to a yoga class. I mean, even from early days when you were just a baby yogi and learning, you just come into class and you're just like a ray of sunshine when you come in.
aw.
And I've even thrown out some kind of difficult classes and I never see you go, "Oh my gosh, she wants me to do this." You just do it to the best of your ability. And so I think you have a great start on aging gracefully because it starts in your 30s and 40s. And I think you're going to be a great specimen when you're my age.
Aw. Yeah, I just laugh if you're asking me to do something that I'm pretty sure my body is not going to do. And I'm like, well, we'll see what it does, but we're going to laugh about it because what
Well,
else
and
can you do?
the thing is, if we keep throwing it out there, one of these days it's going to happen, and that's going to be a micro victory for you.
True. Very true. So,
Absolutely.
well, we're about to the end. And is there any bit of wisdom, if you could just leave the audience with one little nugget from your your life or whatever you think that you want to leave them with?
Just stay engaged. Stay engaged with your body, with other people, with knowledge, with learning. Uh, Engagement is the key.
Yeah, I like that. Stay engaged.
Yes.
All right. Well, it has been so wonderful getting to interview you, and I know that anyone that listens to this is going to get some awesome nuggets of wisdom throughout the entire podcast, especially if we're younger and trying to figure out what is life going to look like as I am moving forward.
Well, and it's funny. I look back on when I was a kid, and people that were in their 50s seem so old. And I think that, they say that what 50 is the new 40. I I think as each generation goes, older becomes younger. You know, in our 70s, I see people in their 70s that are so active. That's because they're engaged. We have to stay engaged.
Hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you for listening to That's Just Human. And if you like and you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. Or if you are on a listening platform, please give me a review on Spotify or Apple iTunes. It helps me get this podcast out to more people. And I am wishing you a fantastic day. Be you, be kind, and remember, everything is just part of the journey.